How's everyone doing? How's everyone doing? You got a cup of coffee? I don't want anyone sleeping through my session, so better have a cup of coffee. There will be push-ups for the people who fall asleep. Yeah, I'll work on the interesting part. We'll see about that. You let me know if it was enough afterwards. Before we get started, I have a funny question for you. So, how many of you have seen or have a database with more than 200 fields in one table? Raise your hand. If we go above, how many have seen a table with more than 500 fields?
Created by us.
Created by yourself. Okay, that's scary. Okay, now we go up a little bit. We go up to 1,000. How many have seen one? Wow, this is not good. Okay, what about 2,000? Okay, Jens, you need to start working on that part, and then David as well. Okay. You have 3,000 Arakis. Shit, okay. Then we definitely have something good to talk about. So if we become 500 in 2 years, we're going to have to move over to the cathedral. And then we all have a standing sessions, and then we'll be a little bit of cheering and singing along and all of that. Would you like that? Cool, good. Then we have something to work on. There's still a few seats here in the front, and I'm not too scary, so it's okay to sit in the front, Albert. Yeah, sure. And doors are closing. Here comes the wedding couple. Yeah, no, that was not the right room for that, sorry. We are here for a totally different things. We're here today to talk about the secrets of smaller databases or bigger data savings in a smart cloud archiving. And you're supposed to present yourself like everyone else, so even though I've already been on stage, I didn't really tell you who I am. And for those who haven't met me before, my name is Johan Hedman. I'm driven by curiosity, whether it's exploring the world, running on trails, skiing in the mountains, or maybe chasing another adventure. And this is me in Norway, out running in Croatia, some competitions I attended this summer. But I'm also a part of Square Moon, one of the bigger platinum partners here in Europe. And I'm very proud of being part of this big team. And especially these 3 days when we arrange EngageU. I'm very proud of being a big part of this community and having you all here. Okay, so the challenge we all have is that all of our solutions are continuing to growing, potentially in all different kind of directions. Not only are we adding features, but our users keep on adding records. And as we saw and we talked about earlier, in some tables that might become a problem when we have too many fields. So I wouldn't say that it's really bad to have 3,000 fields in a table, depending on how you build it. But it may not be the best optimized way of building a FileMaker solution. So the bigger your solution it becomes, so lost the signal here. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so the bigger your solution it will become like a balloon. And when it becomes bigger, all your backups will also start increasing in size. And what comes with that? It comes a higher cost. A cost that will cost you for every time you store it. So the option here is that, and we've always had that, to store things either locally or an S3, and as you saw on the opening keynote here, now we should be able to store it with cloud on an S3, and I'll be telling you more about that shortly. Well, what's important is that we want to make sure we always have our backups closely so we can use them whenever we actually need to. So, as I said, here is what, out of base elements, a DDR database design report of a solution where there are a number of fields that are just going in the wrong direction. There is no plan of this solution on making it optimized. And this solution has so many records at each one of these tables. So whenever you are trying to commit the table with 2,445 fields, it's going to take some time, because all those unstored calculations and other fields that are depending on those need to render before it can actually be committed. And another problem we usually have when we get it into a new legacy solution is that we end up with a solution looking like this. We have multiple errors in our solution where we need to fix before we can get started, and sometimes we need to redo the entire solution. But what the problem usually is, it's that we have a number of records in our tables, and there is no exact statistics on when we do get the problems, but it's a number of combinations that's going to cause you problems. And as most of you most probably do, you don't have one single solution. You might have multiple files in your solution, and you're building table occurrence groups. And FileMaker work much better having that table occurrence group, or TOG, being as small as possible. As soon as you start growing, it needs to check out all those dependencies every time you try to do something. And even though you might have MirrorSync 7 installed on your device, that's going to be one of the things that's going to make it a tiny bit slower because you have too big TOGs. So if the problem is you have too many records or you haven't done your work on optimizing, you need to start on the right path to look into what your problem actually are. So Hansa is probably the best person to ask for slower or better performance, because that's what he do you can wake up at 3 a.m. in the middle of the night and he will tell you exactly your problem. But the slower your performance is, it's not going to get you happy users. And as I said, the more records you keep on adding, your backup's going to cost you more money. And in the long run, that's going to give you higher costs and most probably also some compliance and legal retention needs that you need to control. So then we face this dilemma. Are we going to delete the data that we have in our database, or should we somehow archive the data in another location so it could be reached? And in the past, one of the common ways we did is that we exported the data into a table that looks the same as it was before, and then we kept on adding things in the production environment, and they didn't really synchronize that well if the data was needed. But I'm going to give you a good way or a good example of what you can do instead of importing or exporting data out of a solution. Because what we still want to do is have data available for our users so they can continue to work on a fast, reliable solution in the end. And to do that, I think all our solutions should always be hosted on a FileMaker server. There's very, very few occasions where I say you should have your database locally, and that's usually for doctors that need to have it only for their own purpose with a lot of secret things. What are we going to be talking about now is Amazon S3. How many of you are familiar with an Amazon S3? Quite a few. Very good. Very good. So Amazon S3 is, I'd say, like a bucket of things you can fill with whatever what you like. But it makes it possible for you to store things super, super cheap. I think it's somewhere at price-wise, you pay like 0.22 euros per gigabyte when you are up to like 50 terabytes in size. So it's nothing. If you compare that to storing your database on an SSD, which is closer to your database, where you pay for it being up and running, and the size need to increase and increase and increase, and it's just going to keep on growing. So an S3 will lower your cost of storing data and backups. And here are a few examples of how you can do that. So an industry-leading stability, they use it for NASCAR. Everyone know what NASCAR is? Yeah. So they have tons of statistics to make sure all the cars are running smooth and on the right gas and all of that. But also really cool stuff in medicine and preserving history data and a whole bunch of other things. So how do we handle FileMaker to cooperate with S3? How many of you have used insert from URL? I guess most of you, yeah. There was very few have not done that. So any kind of integration that you do these days, we basically use that using insert from URL. And that's exactly what we need here. We need an account in Amazon. We need to start up an AWS S3 bucket. That will give you a nice API key that you can talk to. And as soon as we have an API key, you all know how well we can communicate from FileMaker, because FileMaker is like a perfect hub for integrations. So then your biggest problem is, together with your client, to identify what needs to be archived, and then for how long it needs to be archived, because I don't think it should be stored forever. So, for example, an invoice, it might need to be stored for 10 years, whereas insurance might need to be there for 20 years for claims and other handles, whereas different kind of other contracts might only need to be there for 3 years. But you still need to have it available for searching. So you set up the S3 bucket, and you make sure you have the right permission to write and read to it. And then you build some kind of an archiving function that runs on a time of when your solution is not having too much of a burden, which is usually during the nighttime. And then you push data to the S3 and making sure you clean up what it looks like in your FileMaker side. But what you also do is you're maintaining a lightweight record of that table, that record that was stored on S3. I'll show you what that looks like in a little bit. And you make it available so that you can pick up that data and be visible for the user, so you can still access and show and see what it looks like. To do that, we're going to run into FileMaker, and then cross my heart, it's not going to go wrong, because I do need to be online. And I don't know this guy, but I hope you haven't seen him around. Scary guy, keep away from him. This is an ordinary FileMaker contact template file. So I made it super easy for you. A little bit of information about this guy. He works for that company. He has so many phone numbers, so he can travel around the world using any kind of SIM card he wants. He has a few emails. He also have a couple of addresses. And here comes the good part. All of that can be stored in a JSON, because we all know how we can transform data into a JSON. And the good part here is, if you read a little bit closer, is that we have kind of grouped in array the different data, so that the addresses of the emails are stored with a related key. So each record that we have has a UUID. So we can relate to the other records, meaning we can store related table in different folders on S3. So we will then build up on the S3 a folder for all our addresses. And it's going to be super unlikely that we have a UUID that's going to be duplication. So each record will have their own place on an S3 underneath the folder of addresses. And then likewise for email addresses and phone numbers. So as you can see here, We keep the company name, we keep the job title, the modification timestamp, name, photo, and so on, all stored in the local folder of contacts. And then we're giving it an address, and this should be, as you probably understand, the UUID, but to make it simple here, you and make that row simple to read, it's a 197.json. So when we are having the archiving script run in night, we are looking at records that needs to be archived, and we are saving them by the UUID in the archived folder. Then we had a long debate. So how do we present the data for the user? There are kind of multiple ways of doing that. So a couple of example choices that we had was, do we really want everything to look and work exactly like they had before in FileMaker? Or should we do something more dynamic so we can reuse it on multiple layouts? And if we do the way that you see it right now, on a FileMaker layout, there will be a bunch of calculations that you need to control for all the labels, for all the buttons, for the tabs and sliders and all of that. So it's maybe a tiny little bit harder to keep track of. But the good part about that is that you can create something that looks almost exactly in the way a normal FileMaker person are looking for the data to be looking like. So let me show you an example how that look like. And when I go to each of these system tabs, I'm loading the data from the archived JSON and present it for you. The other option of showing data would be that I instead created something that is more web-based. Then the user need to understand they are now an archived record, and that the data of the local table is going to be here, and then I can display the data in the same way, working my way through, showing it in a web viewer. But how do we handle all of this? So of course, we do all of this in FileMaker because we love to do FileMaker. So this is the script that creates the JSON, and it's super simple. Remember how the JSON was structured? That we have everything in one table with the related UUIDs for the different table that it was related to. We collect all of that data, and once we send it off, we are not only sending the contact record, but we are also sending off its childs. So every time any changes are done for any of those records, we update that one on S3. So these 24 script steps are the only ones you need, and then still there are a lot of error in here, to send a JSON file from FileMaker to the S3 bucket. Store it where you want to store it, and be able to pick it up later on. And then when you want to get that information, the script is no longer than this. You don't need more rows than this, and you can see we even have some examples on how the data is going to be looking once it comes back. So when you go in between the different tabs of the FileMaker solution that we have in the back here, to load the information, we built a trigger to say, where am I? Which tab do I actually enter? To go and grab that information for each of the different records that was related as child. So if we're going into the phone, we're just asking for the child records of that JSON record. And then we're just creating an array, JSON array, that we show in the web viewer. And then it just works the same way. So it just needs to be controlled by the tab itself. So there's one for address, there's one for email, and then one for phone. And if we go into here and we go into layout mode and we actually see the trigger itself, you see we use that one is called on-panel switch to get which tab we are on, and using that one to fetch the right data. So how do we make it visible and available for the user to get to the data. So we had a long debate about this one, and we figured out the best way of doing this was to create an archive data table where we do not have more than 5 or 6 fields. And this should be the field that you most often need to search upon in the different tables that you have. For a phone table, you usually just need 1 or 2, but maybe for an order table, you might need to use all the 6 ones. But you need a table, so for every record that you're storing in S3, to be able to do a quick find in FileMaker. You could, and I'm not saying you should, but you could make an S3 combination in Amazon, connected with an SQL database, and actually make the search through the SQL database to get your data. But that needs to be an archiving function. And then Jesse's turning up his hand and saying, we can do that with Mirrorsync 3. But in this case, we're just keeping it to FileMaker. And what we're doing here is that every time we are archiving a record, we are creating a record in this table instead and saying, this is a contact record. And the values are values of things that we set up in another table that is called Web Viewer Config table, which gives us an opportunity of instead adding a unique label for each field, where you're saying, when it's the contact table, these are the 6 fields that we're making available. And whenever you then are on a contact layer, let's go to this one, and you use the quick find function, we're doing a search on 2 locations. We're doing a search in the normal FileMaker file, as well as we're doing a search in the archive table for types being contacts. We could have extended that search to also go down in addresses, phones, and email addresses, and show that. So I'm going to show you how many of you have been using base elements as a DDR tool. A few? Yeah, Alexis, definitely. She created the looks of that one. So this search result view is used heavily in that function. So whenever you need to find something, you're just typing away, and it will go and run through all the tables that you like. So what we do here instead, we showcase the information that are available in the different categories. So the first one might be the contacts, second one might be in phone, and third one might be in email addresses, and the fourth one might be addresses, phones, and email addresses. And we combine to show both the real record and the archive record. So we are only making it visible for them to search for things that we can handle ourselves, meaning you have to can adopt the menu and the menu sets to do searches in a way that you can control. When you do that, and the user actually clicks on one of these rows, you will take them to the layout where the actual record exists, whether it's the one archived on S3 or the one still existing in FileMaker. Okay, so why are we doing this archiving? So on some of our solutions, we have several millions records, and they have thousands of web users that are hacking the solution. Like every second, there are new records coming in that needs to be changed or updated and so. And it's really, really hard to have a fast, reliable solution with so many records that needs to read and write. And when we did this, we started to archive the bigger tables where we have a lot of solutions. On all the tables where you don't need to store data, log tables, really old contracts or offer that went on due date, we can just archive them instead of keeping them still in the database. Timing, yeah. We talked a little bit about time before. So when you do start archiving, you need to have a function to get your data back if it's needed. So the JSON that you store, it's structured. So you can build a function yourself to create the record and the related child records because you have all the information that you needed. But you also need to have rules about when you should start deleting records in those S3 records that are stored. So you should set up settings in FileMaker of when a table should get started to be archived, but also after how long of a time it should start deleting the S3 records as well. And when you do that, you need to also delete the records that are still in FileMaker, but in the archive table, to make sure it's not available anymore. Okay, so what do we benefit from doing this? We get a much snappier database where only the relevant data is available for fast queries, and especially for things where you need to read and write back and forward to your tables. So you get a more happier user and a faster solution. And security-wise, the S3 is on AWS, and even though I had a little bit of a hiccup here a couple of weeks back, S3 is very, very secure. So even though you might be storing your FileMaker databases on an encrypted server or whatever, you might be storing it on a local hard drive back home, S3 is very reliable. When you set it up, and on the permission side, you set it up in the way you want it to be, and only the way you want it to be, it's very secure for you. So, when and if you are getting to a point where your databases are starting to reach somewhere around 5 gigabytes, and you are unlucky, your database get corrupt over the night because the backup didn't run or the index failed or whatever, what we usually do is we are trying to do a recover. A 5 gig database of FileMaker could take a day if you're unlucky. And sometimes that doesn't even work. You have to send it over to Claris, and it's going to take them a week before they process it if you don't give them a piece of cake, and they might do it faster for you. But what is important here, you can keep your databases smaller. So even when you run into problems yourself, your databases could be handled much faster, because you are going to run into problem no matter how stable we think FileMaker is. And you don't want your clients to lose data. So by archiving, you can always keep your data, but you can keep your databases fast and reliable. Yeah, and where was that one? Good. That brings us to Q&A. No questions, I hope.
Sometimes when I've taken FileMaker databases and either emptied out the contents of fields or deleted records, I haven't seen the file shrink until I save a compacted version. I was wondering if that's something you've noticed as well.
Yeah, so when you run the backups of something that's been deleting a lot of data, it usually takes quite some time for the backups to actually start shrinking. So what we usually do is that we have a rule of only deleting a certain amount of records per night, to not have too many being deleted at the same time, because also that backup, when and after you've been deleting a lot of records, it's going to take a significantly longer time to run. That's also why it's really important to run that archiving when you don't have too much traffic on your database.
Hey, I'm guessing that when you send the data over to S3, you're creating individual JSON files nested in a folder hierarchy per record. Is that correct?
Absolutely correct.
And is there a reason why you're doing that other than leveraging another sort of cheap, large, scalable database from Amazon? Like why are you using JSON files in an S3 bucket as opposed to some other database technology?
So we could have easily installed MirrorSync, had a really nice SQL server, and do searches on multiple locations using a Lambda and different functions. But I wanted to show you an easy example that I think everyone here could do. Because if you want to learn Lambda, you need a little bit more knowledge on how AWS works. You can, of course, use ChatGPT and get going, but if you want to have an easy example how easy it is to load data to S3 and in a safe way, I think this is a good example on how to handle that.
Johan, we have a tool that manages digital agencies that create advertising for automobile dealerships across North America. And when we built the thing, we were thinking that there would be like the living edge of the data that was really active would be a couple weeks, like 2 or 3 weeks, something like that. We recently had a server go down. We were restoring from backup, and it was only in the midst of this that our contact there said, well, we're really living in today and yesterday. That's it.
Yeah.
And we had this, I mean, these were massive files. We had terabytes of backups and videos and all this stuff. It basically was irrelevant to, getting them back up. It was only a 2-day living edge at the front, today and yesterday. And so our whole backup strategy was wrong.
This is very, very good, Albert, because I think most of the data that are actually in the databases are not used. Most of it is just there because it was entered sometime. But when someone actually needs it, it needs to be very valuable and needed so that you can find it easily. So the more discussions you have with your client, the more you can understand their needs. Like Albert said, we only need 2 days of data. Then we can archive everything else, but it's still there for you. So what's important here is to understand your clients, and as a FileMaker developer, we're all really good at doing that. So it's just about asking the right kind of questions of what's allowed to be archived, when can we archive it, and for how long does it need to be archived?
Johan, a question. A typical problem with archiving data is a changing database schema. So you change field, you add fields, you have rules of thought about that.
Yeah, we've been having a long debate about that one. So adding fields is never a problem, because if you need to bring a record back, we'll only bring back the data you have, or you can create the data that needs to be set. But if you start changing your hierarchy and your field names, you will have problems. That comes with legacy, like old systems and all of that in the back. And what you can always do is you can re-render the archived records. So if you do major changes on your table or your structure or your field names or whatever, putting those files there, you can just do a few thousand or 100,000 a day, and then they will be rerun and you'll have all the data there again.
How are you dealing with the request that comes that says, I need to know who my top 10 clients by value were last year, when you've already archived your invoices and your sales records?
Yeah, so when you need statistics and you need to get a bunch of data stored like that, I probably would recommend you to create stored statistics if the customer are needing to get data like that. So we either say like a monthly basis or a weekly basis of the information that you need to store, because when you start archiving, you aren't in need of getting the details, only the totals, because it's very unusual that they actually need the details of every single order row, or it might be. Usually it's the totals of what did we do that week or that month of that sale. So by creating and archiving that kind of data as well, it's super easy to bring it up and show that to the user. Was that a good answer? Otherwise, there's always functions to bring back data, since you have a get function to the S3. Yeah. And then you can archive it straight back after that.
Yeah, but if you had to recover 25,000 records to sum them, if you had to recover 25,000 records to sum them in a way that wasn't expected, then you've got a big challenge on your hands. And I get what you're saying about store your summaries, and that's great as long as you know that that summary is required before you archive the records on which it's based.
It's definitely, I totally agree. But actually bringing up 25,000 records, that's done in less than 20 minutes. Less than 20 minutes, creating them all. Because S3 are, depending on where you are in the world and where you set up your S3, of course, because you can have buckets near where New Zealand, probably Australia, but if you set it up over here in Sweden or in, I don't know, the US, it's going to take a bit of time because of latency, but it's snapping fast.
So a suggestion and also kind of a question. To Steve's point about archiving and reporting, one other way that you could potentially deal with that would be to use AWS Athena, which allows you to run those kinds of queries on the data stored in structured JSON formats, and it's impressively fast to do that.
Exactly. So Athena is an SQL database more or less at AWS. And you can easily set up that as being your archiving source. But then you need to adapt that to any changes that you might do to your structure in FileMaker, meaning you have to adapt all the changes in 2 places. So again, it's definitely doable, but having a simple example of how you archive easily and quick and on a cheap way, then you're storing a file named as the uuid.json for each of the different records you're storing. It's not taking any place, still valuable, and you can reach it. But with Athena, you probably from FileMaker are going to need Lambda to get your data easily or sync it back and forward.
And then, I don't know if this is actually a question or just a thought, but like record level security. I don't know what my question is exactly. I'm just wondering, have you thought about that very much? Like if a user has access to only records that meet a certain criteria, is there any concern about putting them all in the same bucket? I don't know if there's a problem or not. I'm just kind of trying to think it through.
It is definitely a problem considering how you set up the permissions. But considering all the records that you're making available for the records in FileMaker are by looking at an actual record in FileMaker. So when you do the search, if you're working on the department legal or economy, then you will only see the records because it's still in FileMaker. So when you do the search, you can say, only show me the records of the legal department, because it's actually a FileMaker record that you're making the search to get the information to.
But if, say, I can only see records for contacts in Sweden, that doesn't work. It's like based on field data in the record.
Yeah. So repeating question, if you only like to see data from a certain region or department or whatever it may, and it's just stored in an S3, yeah, it's up to permissions to, and then you can always add up things to make it more visual or less visible. And then you can make things very difficult if you want to. But this was just an easy example on how you can set it up. And then there are multiple ways of adding permissions or storage and other things. This is just a super simple example. More questions?
Well, the example shows. Sorry. Thank you, Johan, for sharing, but the example and the question shows it's not as simple as you like to put it. The question starts with deciding what can be archived and how.
Yes, but
if that is done, then it's easy.
Absolutely. I totally 100% agree with you. That's why you need to work super closely with your clients on this one, because they most probably understand their data much better than you or me will ever do. And also, if you're like what you're doing, Volker, you work in different countries. There are different rules in Finland, Germany, Sweden, and so we can't know the rules all ourselves. So we need to understand the business needs before we start archiving. And also, like I said, when we can start deleting the archiving, because we shouldn't keep data forever for just any reason, even though it's cheap. We could. Yeah.
The shaking of head was it's cheap. It depends on the shaking of head was it's cheap. It's cheaper than keeping it in FileMaker. But once you grow, you see, and you look at the invoicing scheme from AWS and how much you pay for S3, especially if you store large amounts of PDFs or pictures, it costs. So
So when we start, or if we start using FileMaker's own S3 savings, we're probably going to get a bill of a lot more than what we're having to pay ourselves for S3. But until we are there, so that we can start using that, I think archiving all the containers on an S3 also saves us a lot of backup and backup costs compared to storing it encrypted or not encrypted on your own FileMaker server. It's still really, really easy to get a hold of the PDFs or whatever files you might be storing through FileMaker. But on an S3, it's also very easy to handle those files, delete them if not needed, and so, or keep a backup from there. Yeah? Everyone ready for a nice cup of coffee or so you don't fall asleep? Good. Thank you, guys.